This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Eben Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with our whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now, on the show today, we look at the controversy ahead of the burials of the victims of the Nigerian church collapse here in South Africa this weekend. 16 days of activism is also upon us, and we'll narrow the focus on violence against women and children here in South Africa. Then we look at why the weather's been so weird of late, and we end with a look at another cracking sporting weekend ahead. But first, let's get today's news from Katrine Miller.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Miller, and let's just take a look at those top stories this morning. National Assembly proceedings continued until 4 o'clock this morning after yet another dramatic day. Following a 7-hour delay, the House resumed at 9 o'clock last night. The ANC then agreed to put a debate on a report recommending sanctions against 20 EFF MPs on hold until next week. The National Prosecuting Authority will file papers in the Western Cape High Court today to oppose an application to have charges against British murder-accused Shrine Devani dropped. The defence lawyers filed papers after the state closed its case earlier this week. Devani has pleaded not guilty to 5 charges, including murder and kidnapping. He allegedly planned a hit on his wife, Annie Devani, in November 2010. A group of truck drivers from Durban are accusing their employer of abuse. They claim they are forced to sleep on the toilet floor and in storerooms to be able to start work early the following day. These are employees of Imperial Logistics in Mount Edgecombe in Durban, sleeping on the floor and on top of lockers. The drivers say those who've complained have been fired. Moving to the U.S., the death toll from a pre-winter snowstorm rose to 10 in the northeastern parts of the country, paralyzing communities for days and dumping more than 6 feet of snow near Buffalo. The colossal snowfall has damaged homes and businesses, cancelled flights and stranded motorists for as many as 2 nights on the highway. According to officials, temperatures are expected to rise tomorrow, then shoot up, bringing a surge of rain, which is likely to bring severe flood warnings. South Africa is yet again paying midwife to a global initiative. This time, it's a worldwide civil society campaign to fight the scourge of racism and discrimination in sport. Politicians, sports stars and personalities gathered at an East Rand hotel last night to set the Global Watch campaign in motion.
Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela said, "Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. Sport has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. Sport can create hope where there was previously only despair."
And the 4th ODI against Australia is currently underway in Melbourne. South Africa won the toss and elected to bat first. In the 17th over, the Proteas were 3 wickets down with 77 runs on the board. Openers Hashim Amla and Quinton de Kock fell for 18 and 17 respectively, while Faf du Plessis, coming in at 3, managed to contribute 28 runs. South Africa finished their innings on 267 for the loss of 8 wickets. Now remember, all those top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katrine. Now, as most families of the victims of the Nigerian church building collapse prepared to bury their loved ones this weekend, traditional healers have warned that African customs have not been followed during the repatriation process. Remains of 74 of those who died were brought back to the country last Sunday.
Killed 4,500 kilometers away from home. And while 74 bodies have been returned to South Africa, traditional healers believe the spirits of the victims still remain in Nigeria.
Those people who died there, their spirits are all over the place. And now the government is bringing them back to be buried by their families.
And Zweli Thongwane agrees.
There's a certain ritual which must be performed where the spirit departed from the body, so that we make sure that that spirit doesn't stay there wandering and creating havoc.
But what do the families of the deceased believe?
As a family, even if we wanted to do something, but we didn't have any powers because they died in a foreign country, so we couldn't go that side. And we don't know exactly which spot did they die on.
Pathologists advise that the badly decomposed bodies should not be viewed. But the family of Winnie Mbata refused to give up on tradition.
It was not okay. It's a trauma, in fact. It's not good at all. But there's nothing we can do. We wanted to satisfy ourselves.
Meanwhile, memorial services continued across the country. In Bloemfontein, the mood was somber as friends and family remember Boitumelo Bransel.
We were so frustrated in the last 2 months when we knew that Boitumelo was in Nigeria. We didn't know when she would come home because our custom believes that we should bury a person at least, if it's long, in 2 weeks' time.
In Limpopo, 14 victims were remembered.
I, however, invite the bereaved families and relatives to find solace and comfort in the knowledge that their pain is shared with the rest of the country.
In Gauteng, the Premier led a memorial service for 20 victims.
We family members, you might be mourning here, you might be crying here, and we are all crying as a people. But I'm sure their Savior, their Lord, is happy that they died saving Him.
Most funeral services will be held this weekend. Aldrin St-Pierre, SABC News.
Yes, the families of South Africans who died when the guest house belonging to the Synagogue Church of All Nations collapsed on the 12th of September have been strongly cautioned not to open the bags containing the remains of their loved ones. Normally, viewing takes place at a funeral parlour in a family home, church or chapel prior to the actual funeral service. A traditional practitioner, Dr. Nokozola Mdende, says the whole process will also be incomplete for families who would not have a chance to communicate with the spirits of their relatives. How difficult will it be for families to forego the culture and tradition of seeing their loved ones for a last time? It will be a tough decision that many will have to make this weekend. Now, to talk about the predicament that families and friends will be facing, we are joined from the Gauteng Department of Health by Dr. Richard Lebete. A very good morning to you, Doctor. Present also is well-known South African prophet and the founder of the Incredible Happenings Ministry, Pastor Paseka Motsuneng, also known on television for those of you that know as Pastor Mboro. A very good morning to you, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
I want to start with you, Dr. Lebete. Just tell us about this instruction for people not to view their loved ones. Why and how do you view that?
Firstly, I don't view the message that came through as an instruction. To me, the message was an advice. By advice, it means the circumstances and the situation in which these people are was considered. Having noticed that there were a number of them in different stages of decomposition, a decision was taken to advise that it would be best not to view them. So it's not an instruction.
And that advice is in what spirit is that advice? As a way to try and protect families from that traumatic experience?
Yes, I think it's in the spirit of the rest of the repatriation process. We will note that this repatriation process comes out of a situation which actually affected the country as a whole very much. But it didn't only affect the country. It started as an individual thing because there are individuals involved, there are families involved. There's the society and the community, there's a nation involved. By that, it means that there's quite a variety of persons who are involved in this type of situation. And the outcome thereof, especially the decomposition part, has a tendency of having an adverse impact on personalities. But being different personalities, obviously, some of them will view it differently from an individual perspective. But we found it apt that we advise generally that the bodies not be viewed.
Pastor Mboro, if I can come to you. I'm sure you've worked with some of the families in recent times, giving them spiritual guidance and so forth. Just put us in the picture of the normal practice. Why is it important for families, relatives, and friends to see the deceased for one last time before the goodbye?
No, it helps them to really understand that the person is gone and to let it go. Because if you don't see the last, you've got a lot. And also spiritually, we have different beliefs. Under normal circumstances, people, you must speak to their spirit, to say, so and so, I release you now, you know, and all that. And if you don't do that, at times the person comes in dreams and all that. But now, if a person is a Christian, and you look into the biblical principle, you die in the Lord. If you die in the Lord, you are no more there, you are gone. So there is no other force or spirituality that can hold your shadows down and all that. There is a spiritual also process that must be done, the prayers and protecting the body spiritually and the shadow of the person. So yeah, it's a very complex issue.
Just talk about the importance of the spiritual communication and the ritual of getting in touch with the ancestors at this very difficult time.
If you are not, you see, we are living in two worlds. We have the Christian world, which we call it, according to the Bible here, is the kingdom of light, the kingdom of Christ, the kingdom of God. We have another kingdom and other things that are happening. So, if you die in the Lord, your process is done in the Lord. You look at Stephen. When Stephen was stoned to death like that, the bricks and the stones fell on them. And when all that happened, he looked up himself without any family member. He said, I see Jesus standing at the right hand of the Father. And then his face changed. There was glory all over him. And then he went straight to heaven. So those people, the difference here is that in all the beliefs that are here in the country, these people died believing in the Lord. And when you look, many of them, they prayed.
Yeah.
It was the issue of Stephen. When the stones were falling, they went straight to glory. So there is no way any other force can interfere with them because they are with the Lord Jesus where they are.
So the idea that you say, the idea that we saw in the clip earlier, that their spirits are now still in Nigeria and are all over the place, do you believe that idea is flawed because they died in the service of God?
If they didn't die praying, you've got places where I agree with Sangoma somewhere, even if we are not in the same belief. If somebody is hit by a car in a place, and what they are saying is not done,
yes,
the people are going to keep on dying there and all that is going to happen. That ritual is not done.
Yeah.
But these people, it's different because their faith says they are in Christ. So their spirits are not wandering anywhere. They went straight there to their Lord Jesus Christ. The only thing that is a problem, the family wants to find closure, and some of the families believe this and this and that.
Yeah.
But let's respect the belief of the person who died, that they gave their lives to the Lord, and they are in the Lord. So let's honor their faith in the Lord and leave them there.
Dr. Lebete, if I can come to you and ask you, what would your advice? It's now 2 months, and we understand decomposition of a body after 2 months. What would your advice be to the families this week who are dealing with this very difficult scenario? of wanting to view and having cultural obligations, but it must be very difficult. And what would be facing these families?
Yeah. Let me just start by saying we're discussing this in a variety of levels and go on to point out that the spirit of repatriation was done in the spirit of the Constitution, especially the Chapter 2 of the Constitution, whereby religious diversity is allowed, cultural diversity is allowed. But as it's been done by the government, it's that all this we have in mind as we do all these things. Because at that stage, we are doing it as a nation where there is a number of people with diversity of preferences and the likes.
Yeah.
And in that spirit, having seen the degree of decomposition, having allowed the thought process of how it's likely to impact on the persons individually and variously, we couldn't go on and make just one blanket decision. But we know, especially in my experience, I mean, I've seen persons in different degrees of decomposition.
Yeah.
But when their persons, their family view them, they get traumatized. We from the experience side would like to protect them from that sort of situation.
Yeah.
And it's on those bases that advice was given. But just to say, those persons were covered in plastic covers, the body bags. And those they are transparent, the first ones. So they can still be seen.
Be seen, yes.
But the advice still say it will be good. It's advisable that you don't go and view them.
Dr. Lebeta, what about the custom of preparing them for final rest? You know, washing them, the bodies and the clothing of the dead. How do these families deal with this in this space?
Well, it's an individual thing. It's an individual preference. In my work, I deal with people of different religions, of different cultures. Some will insist, some will not insist. But if there be an advice that is based on an intention to protect the emotional status, maybe even the spiritual being of people,
yes,
then that becomes an open advice as we have put it forward.
Pastor Mboro, how do you view the preparation for final rest, the washing of bodies, the washing of clothing and so forth?
It is very important because you must know that a person is not just ending there when they die. There are other spiritual people who go for the body. That's why a person after die, they come back and cause problems. But here we need to look into the level of faith. It can still be done, even if they are closed like that and spiritually do it. Because some of them, they have lost faces. Because, they were not in the fridges, the condition there. And when they come out, the smell and all that. The families, I agree with the doctor, it will take another process first to prepare the families, pray with them emotionally, and because the trauma that will happen after that, we are all gone after that.
Yes.
And to stay in that is going to be very difficult right now.
We're now heading into the weekend, Dr. Lebeta. Just your final remarks on this very emotive topic.
Yeah, it's quite an emotional thing. It's emotional at a variety of levels. It has impacted on the state. It has impacted on the nation. It has impacted on societies, families, and individuals. Now, noting that it's quite a continuum of feelings and emotions. And the government, it's outrightly behind all these people. It's very supportive. It has done everything else. In fact, the best thing that has happened is that the government has maintained its cool. in the planning of repatriating these persons. In that period, they have kept the persons, the people that are involved, in the know. Many departments were involved, social development and all. Those who were taking part, care of the spiritual part and the emotional part of persons, getting them informed of the processes and all. Yeah. We are saying, in line with that spirit, let's go on until we bury our persons along that spirit.
Pastor Mbora, your final remarks and maybe a word of comfort to those families who are dealing with what will be a very difficult weekend.
We thank God because we've been praying. We even set up the whole week of praying for this thing to happen, so that the family can find closure. We thank God for making it possible after so much prayers and fasting and dedication and also with the government. I'm saying to you, rest assured, though the earthly body is destroyed, but the spiritual one is renewed day by day. Let's release them in the hands of God, and they are better off where they are. Their condition is not the way it was. Let's celebrate their life and put aside the bad thing that has happened to them. God be with you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. That's Pastor Paseke Mutsuneng, who is the founder of the Incredible Happenings Ministry here in South Africa, and then from the Gauteng Department of Health, Dr. Richard Lebete. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, time for us to have a look at your views this morning at SABC Newsroom is where we've been finding your views. Let's just have a look at those comments and see what you are saying or talking about in the space. Vanilla Chocolate says, can we talk about how that TB Joshua building went down in Nigeria though? Ah man, an act of demolish much? I don't quite understand. Inside Nigeria says, again, Scone founder TB Joshua shunned the coroner inquest investigating the building collapse at his church that killed more than 100 people. Yes, it is very concerning. Thames Delicious, I don't get why Prophet TB Joshua is failing to appear in court for the hearing. Nigeria, hashtag Nigeria. Yes, the whole world, most of South Africa is asking the same question. McLeod Sibanda says, does TB Joshua think he is bigger than the law? That is certainly a question that a lot of people are asking, not just in South Africa, but in Nigeria as well. It's the second inquest that went by this weekend without him making an appearance. I just want to share something with you quickly. The Global Watch Summit Against Racism in Sport is underway at Empress Palace. It's underway at Empress Palace. Apologies for that. At Empress Palace, east of Johannesburg. Hopefully we'll be live there in a little bit when President Jacob Zuma makes the keynote address there. It should be somewhere around 9:30. I'll keep you informed as to how that developed. But let's go back now to our normal programming and take a look at the front pages from around the globe. In the United States, the Financial Times is reporting that President Barack Obama's immigration reform shakeup is set to spark a fierce battle with Republicans. Then in Europe, the Times says police are struggling to trap tech-savvy terrorists and that police have warned of increasingly sophisticated threats. And also in the United States, the Washington Post has a picture of the recent havoc snowstorms have caused there, especially in upstate New York. We'll be joined by SABC meteorologist Paul Minori a little bit later to talk about that if we don't go live or if we wait for President Jacob Zuma's speech, if it is a little bit behind schedule. Now, before we go to a break, let's have a look at some events taking place today and tomorrow. In Johannesburg, here in Gauteng, the South African Human Rights Commission will brief the media on a report about the systematic challenges affecting the land restitution process. Very interesting, that one. And then tomorrow in Pretoria, President Jacob Zuma will take part in the Nelson Mandela Sport and Culture Day. That's in the 5-kilometer walk, of course, the Unite 2.0 campaign. I'll be there as well. Come and show your support to the legacy of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. You're watching Newsroom. Oh, we're not going to take a break. We're not going to take a break. I can see on the big screen the President is about to make the keynote address at the Global Watch Summit Against Racism in Sport. It's at Empress Palace, east of Johannesburg. Let's go straight there.
Former President Kgalema Motlanthe ka Setswana le re President wa Maloba. Champion of Global Watch, Mr. Tokyo Sekhwale, Sheikh Faisal Al Thani, President of FIFA, Sepalta in absentia, Chairman of the Mandela Foundation, Manzangos, distinguished guests, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, receive my heartfelt greetings this morning. Let me extend a special welcome to all our international and special guests present here, including His Excellency, Mr. Sheikh Faisal Mubarak Al Thani. Correct. You can't say Keleshegisa. I won't even try. I won't even try you. Ms. Navi Pillay, Professor Jabulo Ndebele, and Dr. Sem Rattan. I hadn't seen, is he around? Yes, I want to see you. Your presence at this summit confirms that the struggle against racism and all other forms of discrimination remains crucial and pivotal as we build a better world. South Africa is honored to host this event. This year, we are celebrating 20 years of democracy and 20 years since we defeated apartheid, an evil system of government based on institutionalized racism, which was described by the United Nations as a crime against humanity. Based on their race, South Africans were told where they could stay, live, go to school, which hospital to go to, where to play sports, and literally every citizen was determined on the color of their skins. This form of racism rendered the black majority as pariahs in the country of their own birth. In his seminal address on receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in 1961, Chief Albert Luthuli, the then President General of the ANC, described South Africa as follows, and I quote, "Here, the cult of race superiority and of white supremacy is worshipped like a god. Few white people escape corruption, and many of their children learn to believe that white men are unquestionably superior, efficient, clever, industrious, and capable, that black men are equally, unquestionably inferior, slothful, stupid, evil, and clumsy, unquote. He added, quote, perhaps in one other country on the continent is white supremacy. In no other country in the continent is white supremacy asserted with greater vigor and determination and a sense of righteousness, unquote. The late Strini Mudli, who dedicated his life to the struggle against racism in South Africa and was imprisoned on Robben Island, once offered a compelling definition of racism, which is relevant today as it was during the apartheid days. He said, and I quote, racism is a disease suffered by a group or groups of people who use real or imaginary differences to oppress another group or groups economically, politically, socially, and culturally in order to sustain themselves in power. In short, racism is based on the notion of power, control, and greed, unquote. When South Africans cast their votes in 1994, we were declaring that this land of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Helen Joseph, Harry Gwala, and others was turning its back on racism and all related intolerances. We entered a new era and began to build a united democracy, non-racial and non-sexist South Africa. Given our experiences, the campaign against racism in sport finds a natural home in South Africa. We have experienced it. We hate it. And we are determined to fight racism wherever it rears its ugly head, because we know its impact. We know that it can destroy nations and peoples if it is not eradicated. We are therefore proud today to add our voices to the billions others throughout the world that are determined to do everything possible to say no and to put an end to racism in sport. We are forming part of this important global movement to say no to racism in sports, precisely because we fully appreciate the power and influence of sports in world affairs. As was observed by our departed world icon, former President Nelson Mandela, and I quote, sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth, in a language they understand, unquote. It is this understanding that makes us even more determined to jealously guard against the emergence of racist tendencies in sport. The world cannot allow sports to be used to perpetuate ideas which divide humanity and limit the ability of people to work together for development regardless of race, skin color, creed, region, gender, and sexual orientation. There have been unfortunate and shocking incidents of blatant racism in sports being displayed around the world, in tennis, basketball, and soccer, to name a few. We call upon the entire progressive humanity to frown upon racism in sports and to do everything humanly possible to put an end to it. Ladies and gentlemen, whilst this summit is especially about racism in sport, we need to take our discussions further in order to deal sufficiently with the root causes of racism in all facets of social life. In other words, our point of departure should be the understanding that racism in sports will not end unless our actions to achieve its end are related to efforts to exorcise the demon of racism in society in general. I'm saying this because what happens in sports is a true reflection in microcosm of what happens in society generally. Thus, this should remind us of the ideological correctness of the South African Council of Sports, whose slogan argued that there should be no normal sport in an abnormal society, referring to apartheid. We must appreciate that sport is played in various political, social, cultural, and economic contexts, and is therefore not insulated from the influences of these contexts. It is against this background that sports people must not just defend their sports against racism, but must skillfully use sports to actively participate in the struggle to eradicate racism in society as pursued by the entire progressive humanity. Former President Nelson Mandela further observed that, and I quote, "Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments in breaking racial boundaries," unquote. We experienced this in South Africa. From the Rugby World Cup to the 2010 FIFA Soccer World Cup, sport has proven to be a powerful instrument of bringing South Africans together, of promoting unity in a country that had been forcefully divided through legislated racism. Consistent with these instructive words of our departed world icon, we must use sports to undermine the emergence of movements based on racism and discriminatory ideas. We are thus here to declare a zero tolerance for racism in sport. Sportsmen and women must know that there is no scientific basis that can be used to advance the notion of racial supremacy or superiority and inferiority in sport or anywhere else. Pigmentation has absolutely nothing to do with a person's intellect, character, and talents. What makes one good or bad at any sport is not their race or the color of their skin. To attribute a person's talents or lack thereof to his or her race would be to interpret like a delusional person, figments of one's imagination as reality. We call on all sports-loving people and supporters to embark on a process of introspection and ideological cleansing that will heal or protect them from this disease of racism. We applaud Global Watch as you are forcing people to come to terms to the fact that racism does exist in sport. It is not an easy task. The reality we should face is that racists in every aspect of society are always in denial. They take time to acknowledge that they may be in the wrong. They turn it into a joke. They claim to have been misquoted or that their comments have been blown out of proportion, when the simplest thing they would have to acknowledge is that they need help. The society is also quick to create reasons for their racist behavior. In this way, the problem continues and continues. The Global Watch campaign is thus a most welcome intervention in the fight against the scourge of racism. We are happy that among the positive identified by Global Watch is the establishment of a global barometer on racism, which is meant to check the adherence to the Charter by sporting personalities and other stakeholders. We hope this barometer will not only punish perpetrators, but will also seek to educate those still caught up in primitive ways of seeing human beings. Another equally important issue we must deal with is access to certain sports at a professional level, which may be skewed along racial lines. We must work hard to ensure that there is no single sport in the world that is seen as the exclusive preserve of a particular racial group. There must be equal opportunities in sports that are not engineered on the basis of race. Let us collectively give a big red card to racism in sport. Let us say no to racism in sports. Let us march forth to non-racialism. Let me again close with the words of Chief Albert Luthuli. He said, and I quote, "Our vision has always been that of non-racial democratic South Africa, which upholds the rights of all who live in our country to remain there as full citizens with equal rights and responsibilities with all others. For the consummation of this ideal, we have labored unflinchingly. We shall continue to labor unflinchingly." End quote. We wish Global Wash all the best in this noble campaign against racism. You have our full support. I thank you.